that will run for the next couple minutes. As people are coming in, you can just let us know who you are. I think I'll give maybe another minute before we really get started, but for everyone who's here, welcome. If you are not familiar with Zoom, you might want to look around and see some of the functions. The one that should be in front of you now, unless you have already done it, is the poll that you can answer, just to give us a better sense of who is here in the audience. And there's also, I think everyone should be muted. If not, you can mute yourself, just so we don't have the feedback from background noise. And videos I think are off throughout the webinar. And through the webinar, we encourage questions. We're going to be doing that, having those at the end. So I encourage you, as we move through the webinar, to submit your questions through the question and answer function on Zoom. So if you see the function bar at the bottom, there's a chat area and there's a question and answer, or Q&A. And it's easier for us to track the questions if they're in the Q&A. Sometimes people, the chat function can be really useful too. And if there's a reason to use that, then feel free and use that as well. But we may not be able to find your question if you put it in the chat. Okay, a couple more people joining. Well, I think at this point, I will officially kick us off. And welcome to everyone this afternoon. I'm Allaire Diamond, ecologist at Vermont Land Trust, and I'm here today with Pieter van Loon, who is a forester. And we're on the forester ecologist team. We work closely together at the Land Trust, and one of the areas that we really have been spending a lot of time on in recent years is this area of ash and management of ash, thinking about how we can continue to care for our ash in Vermont in the face of emerald ash borer. So today's webinar is really a very practical, sort of a technical training about one of the tools that we're using to do that. And this is something called monitoring and managing ash. So I said this early on, but I'll just repeat it again because I know some folks are just joining. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please put them into the question and answer section on your control panel on Zoom, which is either at the bottom or the top of your screen, or should be. If you have any issues with any parts of Zoom, if you can't hear, if something just isn't working for you, please feel free to send a message to Catherine. And she's with us here from VLT as well, and we'll try to help with any kind of technical issues that you have with the webinar. And you can feel free to use the chat function if that's useful to you, just to share resources. But the question and answers are going to be concentrated at the end of the webinar, so that we can make sure we get to them in kind of a organized way. So I think we've got, most people have answered the question that's been up. So it looks like we've got a bunch of consulting foresters on the call, on the webinar. We've got a bunch of landowners, and then a couple people who are neither and just love ash. So we welcome all of you, and I think there'll be something interesting here for everybody. I'm going to end the poll. And there will be more questions. Let's see. The second question in the poll is something that just to get a sense of for the landowners and foresters in the audience, just to how you have been thinking about incorporating emerald ash borer into management planning for your clients or on your own land. So if you have a moment to answer that. Great, so it sounds like the vast majority of folks here are incorporating emerald ash borer into your management planning for your clients and on your land. Great to hear. And I think that hopefully today you'll learn another tool or two that you might want to incorporate into that. I'm going to stop that question now and move on with our presentation. So as I just mentioned a minute ago, we at the Land Trust are a team of 4 foresters and 2 ecologists and a lot of other people who really care about Vermont's land and Vermont's woods. Vermont Land Trust has all the green spots on the map of Vermont are conserved with Vermont Land Trust easements. It's ends up being about 10% of the area of Vermont, about 600,000 acres more or less. So there's a lot of ash trees under that green. And so when we heard that emerald ash borer was coming close, when we heard that it had been found in Vermont, we had continued conversations that we've been starting, kind of preliminary conversations about what do we do about emerald ash borer? How do we support our ash trees, our forests? How do we support landowners and consulting foresters who are concerned about this and want to help Vermonters make the best decisions for their land? We got out and looked at the first place where EAB had been found in central Vermont back in 2018. And you can see here Caitlin Cusack and Sumana Serchin looking at some of those really classic serpentine galleries that had been uncovered by state work that had been done in finding this infestation. So we've been interested in this for a little while. And we're thinking about the ash forests that we love. Here showing one that's where the trees are just leafing out, and I think it's an interesting kind of thought exercise to look at ash trees early in the spring before they're leafed out, sometimes after other tree species have leafed out, and think about what would the woods look like if we just didn't have ash. Here on the right are a couple of trees that have been infested with emerald ash borer up in the Champlain Islands, and seeing these the epicormic sprouts and the bark sloughing off, the holes from woodpeckers, that could be the future. And in many ways it will be the future. Is there anything we can do about this to help Vermonters in this context? As we explored this, we got connected through some contacts with the U.S. Forest Service with some independent researchers, Jonathan Rosenthal and Radka Wildova, who together run a program called Monitoring and Managing Ash, or MAMA for short. They are, and their organization is called Ecological Research Institute. It's based out of the New Paltz, New York area, but they have essentially worked really closely with Forest Service researchers and with the Forest Service inventory program to figure out ways to look for emerald ash borer, to survey, and to adapt this to a citizen science framework. And so when we learned about this program, we thought that it might be a really great tool that we could use at the Land Trust and bring to all of our landowners and others in Vermont who are interested in just participating in research and monitoring of ash. So the website monitoringash.org, it has just a wealth of information. There's links to relevant research papers. There's information about citizen science projects. I'm going to be sharing a bit about, back here for a second, sharing about a couple that we are involved with more closely, and then there's some others that we just aren't involved with yet because we haven't in Vermont reached the stages yet of we're still relatively early in our EAB process compared to states further west in the Midwest that are have just seen large-scale destruction of their forests. So one thing that I thought was really interesting as we started to talk with Jonathan and Radka and learn more about the Ecological Research Institute's approach is that they use this concept of emotional stages of EAB invasion. Obviously, we know on this call that this is an insect. It operates under, its population grows and changes, and it travels, and it's like figuring out how it's moving is kind of an epidemiological process. But it's interesting to think of it too in the emotional response to this. And I think I'll just say I've actually noticed some similarities to this in the way that folks in different places in the country and around the world are responding to COVID-19. You're sort of in denial, and then it's coming closer, and then you start to get really afraid. Maybe it hits you or somebody that you know, and it's very traumatic. You feel sad, you might experience loss or maybe sick yourself, and then maybe just resign to kind of the new normal. I was just speaking about COVID-19, but this is this process that has been outlined as well with EAB, that people, if you've heard about this as sort of an abstract idea, it seems like something that you just can kind of dismiss. As it comes closer, you start to worry about it. You start to see ash around you, actually exhibiting signs of it and dying, and then feeling like quite resigned and like there's nothing you can do. So as thinking about the fact that people living in different places around the range of ash, all species of ash, are going to be thinking about emerald ash borer in different ways. Jonathan and Radka at Ecological Research Institute came up with this really, I think, a very interesting graphic that shows tasks that we all can do at each stage of emerald ash borer infestation. And it starts with the pre-infestation phase, which many parts of Vermont are still in this phase. Other parts are in early infestation. Maybe there's some places in the early detected areas where we know that EAB was there before it was detected, obviously, that maybe we're moving into this. But I think most places in Vermont are still in these two phases. And saying that at each phase of EAB infestation, there are things that you can do. You can understand the ash on your land. You can understand the importance of that ash for timber, for traditional uses like basket making, for just beauty that you appreciate on a near a trail or along a road. Thinking about trees that you might want to, that landowners may want to invest in, treating with insecticide versus cutting, thinking about how those incorporate into the management plan, identifying places on a particular property or area where mitigation may be needed. Then there's documenting the beginning of infestation and being able to catch that as early as possible. Because as I said, it's often several years after EAB, it actually comes to an area that it starts to be noticed. And so the more you have your eyes on a place and can kind of catch that infestation in its very early stages, the more options there are to treat it or to deal with it. Later, once EAB has come into an area, there's a process of establishing monitoring plots and mortality monitoring plots, and that's largely what I'll be talking about today. And then some tasks that don't really become apparent until later on in the process are looking for lingering ash. So looking for trees that still appear healthy even when the trees around them have died, and then how to incorporate those lingering ash into research. And a little more detail here about lingering ash. So I think many of us have heard and know that emerald ash borer is pretty devastating on all species of ash. The three species in Vermont, black ash, white ash, and green ash, are all susceptible to emerald ash borer, with black ash appearing to be the most susceptible. And that over time, now this graphic up here in the upper left is one from a few years ago, and there's actually some new research happening that may change this, but I just want to share this for now, that over time, since the infestation of a tree, the x-axis here is time, the probability of mortality of any individual tree or in a stand just increases, and it increases exponentially to the point where there's really fewer than 1% of trees end up surviving. But there are some trees that do end up surviving. And this is true across sort of all types of trees in the forest. So dominant trees, codominant, intermediate, and suppressed. There is some new research from 2019 from Robinette and McCullough that is suggesting that there may be higher levels of survival with some in white ash, based on some research in the Midwest. And so this is a continual topic of research. But in general, we know that the survival from emerald ash borer is really, really low, but it is there. So after, typically less than 1% of trees, some of them can still be healthy. If a tree is still healthy 4 years after 50% of the stand has experienced mortality, then that's considered a lingering ash tree, or 2 years after 95% stand mortality from emerald ash borer. So those trees that still have a healthy crown in those kind of time thresholds are considered to be lingering ash. They have to be big enough to have withstood EAB. So EAB will affect trees greater than 1 inch in diameter. So there is a chance that there's just tiny little seedlings in the forest when the initial wave of EAB comes through, and then those would not have been attacked at first, but then they might then get bigger and then get attacked. So to be a lingering ash, officially be lingering ash, a tree has to be big enough to have withstood EAB from the start, not just be too small for it. Lingering ash trees need to be native species of ash, not treated with insecticide. And what's interesting about them is that they have heritable resistance to EAB, in some cases killing eggs or larvae. And the mechanisms for this are still being researched. There may be new research that has more information about this than what I know. But what I find really fascinating is this graphic, this picture on the lower left, which shows a gallery beneath the bark of a tree, sort of a typical tree that does not have this heritable resistance. There's a larva, this little white larva right in there that's just doing its thing, chewing through, and essentially creating those galleries that will eventually girdle the tree. But then there are some individuals that have some kind of resistance to that, and can actually kill the larvae mid-chew, mid-gallery creation. So what's the mechanism for that? I don't know if we know for sure. I don't know, but I'm not sure if it is known yet. But it's definitely another topic of research. So scion or wood from these lingering ash can be used to develop resistant trees, or resistant individuals. And the monitoring plot network that I'll be talking about is used to detect these mortality thresholds. This 4 years post 50% mortality, or 2 years after 95% mortality, and then those plots essentially serve as kind of the epicenter of the effort to go and search for lingering ash trees in the area. So just to repeat again, I think that it's really interesting here. This is a picture taken by Kathleen Knight from the Forest Service of a lingering ash tree next to a tree that had been killed by EAB. So the difference there is really stunning. A full canopy healthy tree next to one that was killed, and that those insects could have easily hopped over to this tree, and probably did, but somehow it was able to resist that. So what can we do when we know about where lingering ash are? What can we do when we know where EAB is? And Ecological Research Institute is developing this technique of action maps of the Catskill region. So they're taking the colors on this map, which to me looks like some sort of weird paw. The blue looks like a paw print. The colors show when EAB was detected. So the red was earliest known detections, and then the green is the next phase, and then the blue is the next wave. So it's sort of spreading out from these central early spots. And at each stage there's something to do. So in the blue areas are places where there has been EAB detected, but just more recently. There can be plots set up, and people can monitor the trees and wait until those mortality thresholds are reached. Beyond this, EAB hasn't been detected, and so early learning about the trees and watching for EAB is an activity here in the green areas and the red areas. It's monitoring mortality to, again, knowing that those mortality thresholds will be coming or will be sooner. And then in the red areas, it's really going out and using the plots, which are these little stars, to then go and search for lingering ash within a predetermined radius around those plots. So this is one way that we can use our knowledge of EAB and where it is and how far it has, how much mortality there has been in a particular area. So in Vermont, we don't quite have that type of action map. It's something that we may work to develop in the future. But just to show on this map on the right, so the left is just VLT and kind of our conserved land portfolio on the left. But on the right, the purple outlines are where EAB is known around the time of this presentation today. And then the different kind of learning and monitoring efforts that we are trying to do. So we're working with landowners and on our own fee lands to develop plots. We've got, I think there's 11 plots around the state. Some of them are in some of the areas where EAB is known or suspected. Others are outside, and so they're serving the purpose of just kind of that keeping tabs on things and looking for that first sign of EAB. We're also doing a few trap trees around the state, ash surveys on a few properties, and also hanging purple sticky traps, which we were just talking about at the beginning here of how the unique smell that those have. So the monitoring and managing ash, the MAMA Monitoring Plots Network, it's around 58, maybe more plots in 4 states. Like I said, we've got around 11 in Vermont. They show where and when to search for lingering ash. They help us understand local variation in emerald ash borer induced mortality, which obviously we all know is not the only way that ash trees can die. And then they can provide points for outreach and also for local understanding. So this monitoring and managing ash work is citizen science. There are 3 separate projects that all are managed through an online platform called Anecdata. And this is something that's available. It's free. It's available to anybody. And essentially what you would do is just log on here and join, and then join these projects. And there are kind of hundreds of projects on Anecdata, but these are the ones that are managed by Ecological Research Institute. So there's just a really basic ash and EAB survey that anyone can add an observation to. You don't need to have any kind of special training to do that. If you see a tree that is affected by EAB, you would just document that tree, take a point on it, which you could do in Anecdata, or you can enter geographic information kind of manually as well. There's lingering ash search, which is something that we're not doing at all in Vermont yet, because like I said, we're not at that point with the EAB infestation. And then there's the monitoring plots network. So Anecdata is something that you can download the Anecdata smartphone app, which is, I find, to be pretty user friendly, or you can or you can use it on the desktop. And for the work that when I use this, I use the smartphone app when I'm out in the field, taking data on one of the plots, but then I also go back in and check it on the desktop version, because it's just easier to look at, especially where we're looking at dozens of trees. It's easier to look at that on the larger screen. So just to have a little more kind of information about what these plots can look like, the plots have to include at least 40 healthy ash trees. They have to be at least 4 centimeters or 10 centimeters, 4 inches DBH. So the size that EAB can actually affect them. They can be any shape. They can span wetland or upland settings. They can have any species of ash in them, or a combination of species. But the really important piece is that those 40 trees there can't be any plans to cut or treat them with insecticide to prevent EAB infestation or cut them down. They have to just be trees that a landowner is okay letting them just ride out EAB until those mortality thresholds are reached. Once there's a 50% mortality or 95% mortality, dead trees can be cut. But that's that's one thing to consider. It's hard to have these plots near like a road or a trail, because with that, you know, trees that are infested by EAB can sometimes really die and kind of dry out really quickly and snap. That can pose a danger for being close to a trail where people might be out there. And so we have tried to establish these around community forests and had trouble figuring out where to put a plot that wasn't close to a trail or a road. So these are just a couple of the plots that we've got. This one here is over in Starksboro. This is a swamp for the most part. I think there might be a couple of upland trees, but I think they're almost all green ash at the base of a really nice kind of rich slope that has a bunch of white ash as well. Another plot is in Williamstown, and this is largely in a black ash swamp and includes almost all black ash except for this part right here on the edge where we jumped up onto sort of a ledgy wooded area and got a few white ash as well to include. And then the bottom plot is on another black ash dominant site down in Arlington. So it's a riparian, a very, a small stream going through it. So it's a riparian area. The plots they have to be a minimum of a ½ acre in size, and they shouldn't be more than 10 acres in size. So depending on the landowner and the site, it's best to look for a place where there's a concentration of ash trees, but it can extend over 10 acres. I think having it go further out it's just harder to find the trees in the future because it does require annual monitoring. So it's helpful to just have the trees closer together, I think, for most people to be able to see them. It takes about a half a day to set up a plot, and then every year it's around 2 hours to take the data in that plot. And so what we have done is we have assisted in the setting up of these plots, and then VLT staff monitor some of them, and then landowners or other volunteers have taken over the monitoring of some of the other ones, and we're tracking that data. We have plots on conserved land and on fee-owned land, and then we've helped set up plots on land that's not conserved as well. As I said, any species of ash, green ash, white ash, and black ash. Pieter will talk a little more about that. And on each of the trees, the data that needs to be taken is, are there definite signs of EAB? Are there those really classic wide S's, the serpentine galleries under the bark? Can you see a larva? If you cut away some of the bark, actually seeing larvae, or those D-shaped exit holes that are really classic. I'll just say personally, before EAB came to Vermont and before I got to see some trees that were impacted by it, I was walking around for years and years looking for Ds on trees, and I always thought I would be able to find them, but I was really surprised when I first did see the first tree that did have some. It was really, really hard to see those. And so it's not as distinctive of a feature as just because they're small, they're not as distinctive as I had hoped. And so for folks on the call who have not yet encountered a tree with EAB, this is not as distinctive as you might have been led to believe by some of the little like ID cards and things that are out there. One thing that is a lot more obvious, is what we have decided in working with ERI to kind of label this as a probable EAB sign. It's not a definitive sign, but the blonding or flaking on a tree with woodpecker holes where the woodpeckers have extracted the EAB larvae. And I think some of you are probably aware of the really interesting kind of observation followed by some research that shows that woodpeckers are some of the best natural predators of emerald ash borer larvae, and if a tree is standing through the winter and having, has larvae moving and living under the bark, woodpeckers will just detect them, find them, and just extract them, and they can reduce the larval population of an individual tree by like 90%. So I think encouraging woodpeckers in stands where people are worried about EAB can be a really good thing. Obviously, once they're not going to prevent infestation, but they certainly can slow it down. So this blonding is a really distinctive kind of sign. It's flakes of bark that are missing from the tree, so it looks blonde or light. But then beneath those flakes are these woodpecker extraction holes that go beneath the bark. So because the woodpecker's been, pecking through and pulling that larva out. This is really different from, well, not really different. I think it's hard to distinguish sometimes, especially when you're looking high in the tree, this really common fungal symptom of a fungus. It's called smooth patch. That's caused by a bunch of different kinds of fungi that causes the outer layer of ash bark to slough off. And this is something that I see really commonly. I see it high in trees, I see it low in trees. Sometimes I see trees where there's more of this than not, the smooth patch. But in looking closely at it, if I don't see those larval extraction holes, because the woodpeckers are picking off this bark and then they're pulling the larvae out, this is just bark sloughing off on its own. It's a distinctive difference. So that is something that the blonding is something that's really distinctive. The emerald ash borer come to a tree. They usually arrive first in the small branches in the canopy of the tree. And then because they're in those small, finer branches and then moving kind of gradually toward the center of the trunk and then moving down the trunk, that's much of the reason why they can be undetected for several years, because it takes a couple years, a couple generations of the larva and the beetle to occur before we start to really see the sign. But looking high up in a tree, especially a tree that you know used to be healthy, looking high up in a tree that has that blonding with binoculars can be helpful too, can really be a good sign that there is likely EAB there. And then possible EAB signs that also could be caused by other things: thinning or dieback in the canopy, epicormic shoots, or splits in the bark. And again, these things can be caused by any number of pathogens or stressors. So in the assessment of these ash trees in the plot, there's a canopy health rating that has to happen for every tree. And this is something when I've set up plots with landowners and with consulting foresters, it's really helpful to stand and just look up and have a discussion about each tree. Sometimes people have to move around to different sides of the tree to get a good look at the top and deciding on what the canopy is. And if you move forward in setting up some of these plots, I will send you there's PDF documents with all of these canopy class. The key for this, that's really helpful to have as a printed piece of paper to have in the field with you for discussion and just to keep on looking back at it and help calibrate kind of what's a class 1, what's a class 2, and so forth. So class 1, healthiest canopy, the canopy is full and healthy. Class 2, it still is pretty full, but looks a bit thin overall, but no sort of dieback in particular parts of the tree. It just has a bit of a thinner look to it. And all of these, there's sort of natural shade-induced dieback of branches lower down on the trunk, and that's not really included in these. You're really looking at the full kind of upper canopy of the tree. Class 3, canopy class 3, canopy has dieback, but less than 50%. Starts to look like there's, it's not the healthiest tree around, and there's maybe some particular areas that are less healthy than others. And then class 4 and 5, class 4, the canopy has at least 50% dieback, but still has some leaves. Class 5, no leaves in the canopy. There may be leaves on epicormic shoots or stump sprouts, but the canopy is essentially dead. Sharing just a few, and I'm sorry for all the text on the slide, just some details about setting up the plots here. Tools that are really kind of essential are having a tree tag. We've been using aluminum tree tags and aluminum nails. We have tags that we've just been scratching numbers into, but forestry suppliers has tags that have numbers already pre-printed. So either one is helpful. Nails that are the right size, that are not going to let the tag kind of fall off over the top. We've had that happen a little bit, like the head of the nail is too small for the hole in the tag. A small hammer just to hammer the tag in. Tool for measuring DBH, tape or Biltmore stick. We encourage always having a paper data form and always taking the data on a piece of paper, as well as, if you have it, taking it on the NX Data app, which can work even without a cell signal. It helps to have it opened before you get out into the field on your smartphone or your tablet. But I've worked with these on tablets and on smartphones, and it does work pretty well, but there's always a chance that it won't, and I have lost data before, so it's always helpful to have the paper data form to be able to re-enter that. I think I would say paper is essential. The smartphone is great, but less essential. If you don't have a smartphone, a camera and GPS to take the data on where you are and take pictures of the trees. Like I said, binoculars can be great to do to look for those woodpecker holes higher up, and then the keys for the canopy class and EAB sign. And just a couple little details, that if all the plots that we've set up in Vermont so far, none of them have had any EAB yet. So we have been just choosing 40 trees that look like good trees. We try to choose the healthiest looking ones. If there's some that are already a class 3, canopy class 3, we try not to choose those, because it's just, they're already starting from kind of a lower health point. So we've just chosen 40, but if EAB were to be on site, and I'm assuming that we'll be facing this in the future, then we need to define the area of the plot and then include all of the eligible trees in that area. Live trees are tagged. Dead trees, if they have EAB sign, if it's definitive that they've died from EAB, they should be included in the plot, but they don't need to be tagged. They only get counted one time once they're dead. And as I said before with the canopy class, when I went through that, count trees as dead only based on the canopy. So if there's some stump sprouts coming up, then if the canopy is totally leafless, then the tree would be counted as dead. And if there's any part of it is alive, then that would be counted as living. So we hope that this is helpful as an introduction, sort of the indoor portion of the training for how to set up a plot, and that it inspires you and or your clients, if you're a consulting forester, to want to do this on your land or on their land. We do ask that if you want to set one up, that you just let us know, because we're tracking these plots for Ecological Research Institute. We're hoping to, again, coordinate with consulting foresters, coordinate with volunteers and landowners about that, but we just like to know where they are, so we can share that. We're happy to come out and help you set up a plot. We can consult over the phone as well, if, based on distance or kind of COVID concerns. And feel free to contact Peter or I, and our email addresses are there at the bottom, or other VLT staff members that you may have relationships with, if you would like to do that, and we can help you do that in the way that's best for you. And I'm going to turn this over to Peter now, who can share a little bit further perspective and information about ash management and monitoring.
Great, thanks, Allaire. Thank you, everybody, for taking a little time out of your day to come listen to us talk about this. This is exciting. We've got a fairly good geographic spread of folks on the webinar today, and I think one of the things that's powerful about this program, if we can get enough plots set up, is it helps the state and foresters, landowners in general, have a better idea of where EAB is, because we have more people out there looking for it. So I hope people do get involved and get out there and set some plots up. I think when I was a consultant, one of the things that I really valued was a client who was really connected into their land. I felt like the more connected to the land they were, the more interested they were, the easier and more rewarding it made my work. I think one of the things that was difficult was finding things that would really grab people's attention and get them interested in wanting to go out and sort of interact on their land. But I think this MAMA project is a really good one. As Allaire mentioned, there's something to do at all stages of the EAB infestation, even pre-infestation. And I think, I also had sort of the analogy with the COVID-19 and the uncertainty that Allaire was talking about before with EAB. Often now that EAB is here, landowners have a lot of questions. Where is it? Is it close enough that I need to worry about it? What do I do about my ash trees? Do I need to cut them all? What do I do with my favorite ash tree, which is in my backyard? Those kinds of things. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I think part of that uncertainty has sort of fed the narrative of now that EAB is here, you need to cut all your ash, which we know is absolutely not the case. But I think what it does for people is it gives them sort of a feeling of control. Well, EAB is here, I have to go cut all my ash, so I'm gonna go do that. But like Allaire alluded to earlier, I think if you advance to the next slide, Allaire, the study out of Michigan State by Deb McCulloch and Molly Robinette was really eye-opening, right? They've had EAB for, well, about 18 years now. And after 13 years, they went back to those places where EAB had been first, sort of the epicenter of the outbreak. And they looked at stands with white and green ash and looked at survivability. And they found that although there were stands that had 0 survivors in them, there were many that had fairly good survivorship, even up to 100%. And the further away you got from the epicenter, the better the survival was in white ash, not so much for green and black ash, but in white ash. And really in Vermont, that's mostly what we're talking about is white ash. So they found that if you were, say, 80 to 90 kilometers from the epicenter, so if you're more than 40 or 50 miles away, the survivability was somewhere between 40 and 100%. Now, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen here in Vermont, but it does give us a little bit of hope. And I think it speaks to being careful with our ash and not being too rash and going out and cutting it all right off. Let's see. One of the things that I think this MAMA project also does is help give landowners a little bit more control, a little bit more sense of control over the situation. It gives them a lot of information about whether EAB is there or not, sort of the trajectory of the infestation, condition of the trees, and information is power. It gives you in a better place for making decisions. And so your role as a consulting forester, maybe, I think you can go to the next slide, Allaire, maybe to just, first of all, helping your clients figure out what an ash is and how to identify it. It's something that we all do without even thinking about, but taking them out and helping them identify the characteristics of the ash on their property. Another thing you'll be really helpful to them in is locating that plot. A lot of people are not terribly familiar with their property, and where the ash is, where a plot can be set up. I think because a lot of our clients, or the vast majority of our clients, are in UVA, as Allaire mentioned, because these trees have to stay through the duration of the study, you can't cut them. So you need to find places where you can put these plots and not run afoul of the UVA program. So if the next slide, Allaire, I think they'll sort of pick through some of the places that we've talked about and located things are, doesn't seem to be advancing on its own. Maybe you need to hit it one more time. There we go. Along the edge of a field, maybe you're going to have to advance it on its own. It doesn't seem to be doing it. Or in an area where there's been a recent timber harvest, so you're not going to be back in there for 15 or 20 years anyway. Go ahead to the next one. Or along the buffer of a stream, or as you can see in the center at the bottom, buffers around a wetland and stream. The other option is to, as Allaire mentioned, you could have plots up to 10 acres in size. So if you're looking at 40 trees, that's fairly spread out. If you want to just go pick 40 trees over an area of 5 to 10 acres or 2 to 5 acres, that can be your plot. and then you just preserve those trees as you're doing your silviculture in the future. Another point that Allaire made, and I'll just reiterate here, is the one thing that seems to be sort of a common disagreement or a point where people don't necessarily always agree on is figuring out what the crown class is. How healthy is this tree? And that's something that foresters can be really helpful in guiding their landowners with. Like Allaire mentioned, we've got white ash in closed canopy stands are often shedding those lower limbs. They're not providing a benefit to the tree anymore, so they're self-pruning. It's not actually that the tree is unhealthy. That's a completely healthy, natural response. And I think if you go to the next slide, oh, I'm sorry, there, sorry. The PDF that Allaire mentioned can be really help with those treatments. One other thing it does is it provides a slightly different, if you are an aggregated plot where 40 trees that you're not going to be doing anything to, you're going to let go through this whole process. A little bit of a different management regime, right? And it gives you an opportunity to talk with your landowner about how you're going to manage ash on the remainder of the property. And as we've seen through the great work from Tony D'Amato, we really go to the next one now, Allaire. You don't want to be managing for the insect. You want to be managing for the forest ecosystem. Really about continuing the good silviculture that you're already doing and thinking about ways to maintain the ash component in your stand. So you're continuing to do the same good work, you're just being a little bit more intentional about assessing the ash and how it fits into the future of your stand. So look for opportunities to regenerate ash. And when you're doing that, think about a few things like they're very tolerant when they first germinate and when they're up to, say, hip or shoulder height, and then after that they're pretty intolerant and they need some space, so you may have to make larger openings, quarter acre and up. Good recruitment. You could also do a low density shelter wood or something like that where you're knocking the basal area back to about 40 square feet, so you've got enough light for those trees, young seedlings, to get up in the sapling and pole class. You also need to remember that ash are dioecious, so you need to go out at some point, which means there are male and female trees. So you need to go out at some point where you can make that distinction. In nature, there's about 7 times as many males as females, so it's important to go out there and figure out where the female trees are and make sure that you're retaining some of those in your silvicultural treatments. You might also want to retain some of the ash with large, healthy crowns. That seems to be a characteristic of lingering ash. They have a really good, healthy crown to begin with. To think about there, and other things you can think about it more. One thing that I like to think about is that because ash is often the largest tree in the stand, they grow really well on our sites in general where they are. So if you leave a few of those, you're providing a tremendous wildlife benefit in that you're going to be recruiting snag and bend trees and eventually some very large coarse woody material to your site. This slide that you're seeing now, there was a webinar just before this one that I was involved in, and Tony gave a great presentation, yet another one on managing EAB and ash and climate change. And so if you go to that forestadaptation.org site and look at their webinar series, probably by the end of the day, that webinar will be up. Tony does a really great job of explaining about how ash fits into the landscape and how to do really responsible ash management in the face of EAB and climate change. So I guess I'll leave it at that. And we've got, we're very thankful to have Marcus Bradley here today. And he's done some of this work with clients in the central part of the state. So he's going to take a few minutes to talk to us about that. Thanks, Marcus.
All right.
So Marcus, I think if you, oh, you're on, good.
I'm on. So listen, my internet is terrible.
Seems
Yeah,
like we've lost Marcus.
Well, I'll just say this is Marcus and a client of his in East Montpelier or Plainfield. I forget. I think it was Plainfield. Are you back?
Yeah.
Marcus, I think.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Am I going? I'm in and out already.
Again.
All right. I'll try. We can abandon me if you need to. So this is a client, Alan and Claudia Clark in Plainfield, and they have a nice woodlot. And Alan and Claudia are interested in the plight of the ash, and it was probably Allaire that suggested a monitoring plot, and they were in favor of it. The property, I would say, is not heavy to ash, but there was a suitable area of probably about 5 acres that contained a decent run of ash of various sizes, dominant, co-dominant, and some intermediate stems. And so we tagged 40 trees, and we numbered them and we classified them. It took about half a day to get the work established, and I assume it will be a little quicker going through time to go in there and assess the trees. The site is located within a couple miles of the known infestation on Cutler Four Corners Road in Orange, so it's close. We didn't find any visible signs, and generally I would say that the trees appeared to be healthy. And so we'll watch this, and you know, it's definitely fulfilling this particular client's objectives to be part of this monitoring, and to for all of us to know more about ash in the future. Not sure what else to add other than I view ash is about to struggle. As we all know, I did read in my chestnut journal that 3,000 years ago, hemlock pollen disappeared from the Northeast, and it took several hundred years, but hemlock restored itself. And so I envision that we are about to see the same thing. I don't think ash is going to disappear from our landscape, but we're going to need to help this species get back on its feet after this initial wave of EAB. And so all the suggestions that Pieter was mentioning, leaving certainly leaving a certain proportion of ash of various sizes is definitely what we've been trying to instill in our management. And I think I urge everybody to be thinking the same way.
That's great. Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is really helpful to hear your perspective. And we've worked with a couple consulting foresters with Marcus, Dave Senio, and I'm not sure others that VLT have worked with on these plots. So definitely it's great to hear your thoughts on kind of like how this fits with the landowner's goals. It fits in with the overall management on the property. This particular site I think is great because it's really easy to access from the road as well. So it's a potential place for, you know, possible educational, like a tour or a walk at some point in the future as well. So at this point, I would love to answer the couple of questions that we've gotten. And if anyone is thinking of other questions, please enter them into the question bar on Zoom. And we've gotten a couple that I'll just go through right now. So, so Dan Healy has asked, is there a need for more plots in Vermont? And if more plots are needed, are there certain regions, natural communities, et cetera, that need representation? And I'll answer that. I'll just say, yes, I think there's the need, the capacity for as many plots as we want to put in, our collective energy has to put in plots. I think Dan, you're sort of down in the like southeastern Vermont area. I don't think we have a lot down there, so it would be great to have some more. I think that if there's a choice, a lot of this is really determined by the interest of particular clients or particular people, but that we'd love to have plots in the areas where EAB has been found, or in the kind of those secondary zones as well, just because we know that those are the ones that we'll be needing to watch, and we might identify new infestations from them, because there is always the chance that one of these plots will be a place where we identify a new spot of EAB. And in terms of regions, natural communities, Ecological Research Institute is really interested in working on black ash, because black ash is hit hardest by EAB, and it also is so culturally significant to Abenaki and other traditional tribes in the region. So I think places like black ash swamps, floodplain forests that might have black ash, and other sort of black ash seepage forests, other black ash dominated natural communities would be great places to put these in. But I think it's really great to have a distribution of the plots as well over the whole, the whole range where ash is found. All the species of ash are found in our state. As Pieter said, wetland spots are really great because they often are not going to be in conflict with other management goals, because there may not be a lot of management plan for the wetlands. Sabina, you have asked about land in Jericho, the areas that would meet the criteria. Can new plots be added? Yes, definitely. And I can work with you on that since since I know you and we both in Jericho. And
Allaire, can I interrupt for a second?
Yes, sure.
I was just saying to Dan that we've got a couple of plots, one in Brattleboro and one in Marlboro. I think the one in Brattleboro is interesting because, as we know, we've got EAB just south of here in Massachusetts. Your company works a lot in the Connecticut River Valley, and we know we've got some fairly close there as well. So I think the more we can put in that area, so we can get sort of an early detection situation going, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Pieter. And Sabina, you have another question about an ash that's been treated with insecticide. Does anyone know if the insecticide moves into the leaves? And if it does, is there information about bioaccumulation and other effects on other invertebrates and things like birds that eat them? I'm going to punt this, but Pieter, do you have more information on this? I think I could kind of dredge something up, but I don't think it'll be accurate. So.
Right. I do know of one study. They looked at woodpeckers, and there didn't seem to be any effect on the woodpeckers as a result of this, but that's the only study I know of. It will definitely affect other insects that chew on the leaves, but I'm not sure there's a lot of research. There must be some, because the things have been approved, but I know that there is a very nice PDF that was put together that talks about this. I'll try to find it, and we'll send out a link to all the participants.
Thank you. Yeah, and there's VT invasives. If I think many of folks on here are very familiar with that site, but that's a great clearinghouse for information about all invasives, and the site on EAB has a lot of different resources. Tina is asking, should various conservation groups encourage those who manage UVA to support the set-asides of ash for the ash monitoring, so they're able to accept initiatives on landowners' property, or have they already accepted this? So thinking about how this interacts with UVA, Pieter, you mentioned this a little bit. Do you want to give some more perspective on this one?
Yeah, we haven't had any conversations with Forest and Parks about this. At this point, I think it's fairly simple for landowners to find places where they can leave 40 trees behind and watch them as EAB moves through, using those sort of areas that I talked about. They also don't necessarily have, it doesn't necessarily have to be one block. That's preferred, but if you've got, 15 along the edge of a field and you've got another 25 around a wetland, that's a plot. So getting creative with how you do this in such a way that those trees can be left behind, I think you can avoid conflicts with UVA pretty easily.
I wanted just one more little tip from on the plot setup, and I think this is probably something that maybe is obvious to people, but in setting up the plots, when tagging the trees, it's really helpful to think about where, especially if they're spread out across the landscape, to put the tags on like the same side of every tree, say on the north side or on the side where that's facing the trail or the way that you'd be coming into that area, just to be able to see them. And I think it's helpful to tag them geographically as well, like with GPS, but especially if they're going to be spread out, that would be the most helpful way to find them again.
So one thing, just one thing that we forgot to mention, but I wanted to mention before we're done, is that this was approved for 1 SAF credit. So those folks who stuck it through to the end will get that credit. We'll be sending the information off to them. Okay.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody who has come and joined us today. Hopefully this gives you another tool in your toolbox, something to talk about with landowners or think about for yourself or other lands that you might be working with. And please feel free to reach out to Peter or I, or like I said, others at VLT if this is of interest or you'd like to learn more. We're happy to send you those data sheets and answer any more specific questions. So with that, I'll see if Peter has anything else to say and give you the final poll of the day, just to see if we can gauge interest and if anyone's interested in doing this. We won't be tracking who answers what, but just for our helpful information. And with that, I want to just thank everybody. Please, if you've got photos or stories about ash trees that you love, send them to us at ash@vlt.org. We're collecting these. We have been for the last year or so, and we're publishing them on our website and on our social media, and just compiling them as we deal with EAB in the future of ash. You'll be getting a short survey in your email about this event, and we encourage you again to reach out to us and learn more about this and other work that we do at Vermont Land Trust.
Thanks so much for spending a little time with us today. I look forward to working with you in the future on some of this.
Yeah, thank you. Just going to give 30 more seconds for the poll and then I'll end the meeting. Great. All right, have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.